Nari stood alone at the lowest podium in the grand chamber. Above her, 4,000 seats rose in wide circles, like the inside of a bowl, and every seat was filled. Representatives from 312 species looked down at her. Some had scales, some had feathers, some were just clouds of light held together inside glass suits. All of them were watching. She had known this day was coming for months. The whispers in the hallways of the Senate had grown into open speeches. The coalition against Earth had been building since the beginning of the year. Led by Grand Legislator Vorin, a tall creature with gray skin and 4 arms, who had held power over the Senate for nearly 60 years. He sat at the highest point of the chamber, looking down at her like a judge who had already made his decision. The charge against humanity was simple. Earth was growing too fast. In just 80 years, humans had colonized 14 star systems. They had built trade networks that stretched across the galaxy. Their medicine had saved millions of alien lives. Their ships were fast, their soldiers were brave, and their engineers could fix anything. And all of that terrified the older civilizations. Vorin had called humanity dangerously expansionist. The Dracovian Empire, a militaristic species that controlled an entire arm of the galaxy, had called humans biologically aggressive. Other species used softer words, but the meaning was the same. Humanity was too much, too fast, too hungry, too alive. The motion on the floor was called the Expulsion Act. If it passed, Earth would be removed from the Galactic Compact. Every treaty would be cancelled. Every trade agreement would end. Humanity would have 90 standard days to pull out of all shared space and retreat behind their own borders. Nari had been given 15 minutes to speak in Earth's defense. She used every second. She did not raise her voice. She stood straight in her dark blue uniform and spoke clearly. She reminded the chamber that human doctors had developed the cure for the Veshan plague that had nearly wiped out 3 species. She reminded them that human cargo ships carried 40% of all goods in the outer trade lanes. She reminded them that when the pirate fleets of the Broken Rim had threatened the Senate's outer colonies, it was human soldiers who had volunteered to push them back. The chamber was silent through all of it. Not the silence of respect, the silence of a decision already made. When she finished, Vorin stood and called for the vote. His voice echoed through the chamber like the sound of a heavy door closing. One by one, the delegations cast their votes. The numbers appeared on the central display above Nari's head, growing in real time. 218 in favor of expulsion, 94 against. The motion passed. A low sound moved through the chamber, something between relief and excitement. Vorin allowed himself a small nod. The Dracovian representative, a broad-shouldered warlord named Gessen, leaned back in his seat with a grin full of sharp teeth. Nari looked at the numbers for a long moment. She picked up her datapad from the podium. She looked up at Vorin, and the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. "You will remember this day differently than you think," she said. Then she turned and walked out. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. No tears, no anger, no dramatic last words, just the calm, steady sound of boots on stone, and then the heavy doors closing behind her. In the corridor outside, her aide, a young officer named Kang Taeho, was waiting. He had watched the broadcast on his personal screen, and his face was pale. "Ambassador," he started. "Not here," Nari said, and kept walking. 12,000 light-years away, on Earth, Admiral Park Do-hun was watching the same broadcast in a room buried deep beneath the surface of the Pacific Command Center. The room was called the War Room, but it did not look like one. It was quiet and clean, with soft lights and a single large screen on the wall. 3 people sat at the table. Do-hun was at the head, a man in his late 50s with gray hair, cut short, and a face that showed very little of what he was feeling. To his left sat Shin Unji, the director of Earth's Deep Space Intelligence Network. She was younger than Do-hun, with sharp eyes and a habit of tapping her finger on the table when she was thinking. She had not stopped tapping since the vote count passed 150. To his right sat Bei Juan, captain of the ESS Namhe, Earth's most decorated warship. Juan had been called back from patrol for this meeting. He still wore his flight jacket and had not slept in 30 hours. But his eyes were clear and steady. The broadcast ended. The screen went dark. The room was silent. Eunji spoke first. 218, she said, as if tasting the number. That is more than we expected. It does not matter if it was 200 or 300, Do-hun said. His voice was low and even. The result is the same. He reached across the table and opened a secure terminal. His fingers moved across the screen, entering a code that only 4 people on Earth knew. A file appeared, marked with a single label in red text. Protocol, closed door. Juan leaned forward. So we are really doing this. There was no excitement in his eyes, no anger, just the steady focus of a man who had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. They gave us 90 days, Do-hun said. That is more than enough. He turned to Eunji. Wake up the network. Every listening post, every hidden relay, every sleeper asset. I want full coverage of galactic communications within 48 hours. Eunji nodded and stood. Do-hun turned to Juan. Recall the fleet, all of it, every ship, every soldier, every engineer. Bring them home. Juan stood as well. And then? Do-hun looked at the file on the screen. Inside it was a plan that had been written 12 years ago, updated every 6 months, and tested in secret simulations more times than anyone wanted to count. It was a plan built on a single idea, that one day the galaxy would decide it did not need humanity. And on that day, humanity would prove just how wrong that decision was. Start the clock, Do-hun said. We have 90 days. The galaxy expected anger. They expected protests, threats, maybe even a desperate attempt to negotiate. Some of the more nervous species expected war. The Dracovians had already moved extra ships to their border, just in case. What they got instead was silence, followed by the most organized withdrawal in galactic history. On day 3, the first human cargo ships began pulling out of the shared trade hubs. They moved calmly and in perfect order, like a school of fish turning at the same moment. Station managers across the galaxy watched as human crews packed their equipment, wiped their data terminals clean, shook hands with their alien co-workers, and walked to their ships without a single word of complaint. On the Senate floor, Vorin watched the reports with satisfaction. You see, he said to the other legislators, they know their place. The transition will be smooth. But not everyone shared his confidence. Ambassador Taylor of the Marathi Collective sat in her office above the Senate chamber, reading the same reports with a very different feeling in her stomach. The Marathi were a peaceful species, known for their medical science and their careful thinking. Taylor had voted against the Expulsion Act. She had argued that Earth was not a threat, but a partner. No one had listened. Now, as she watched the withdrawal unfold, something about it bothered her. It was too fast, too clean. There was no confusion, no delays, no arguments about property or contracts. It was as if the humans had rehearsed this. She pulled up a map of human movements across the galaxy and began to trace the pattern. The ships were not leaving randomly. They were pulling back in a very specific order, starting from the outermost systems and working inward like someone carefully folding a map. Every timeline was precise. This was not the retreat of a defeated people. This was a plan being executed. She sent a private message to Vorin. Something is wrong. The withdrawal is too organized. They were ready for this. Vorin did not reply. On Joint Defense Station Kappa 7, Captain Bei Juan stood on the observation deck and watched the last human transport dock with the station. Kappa 7 had been a symbol of galactic cooperation for 30 years. Human, Marathi, and Pelori soldiers had served together here, guarding the border against pirate fleets and rogue threats. Juan had spent 4 years on this station. He knew every corridor, every mess hall, every quiet corner where soldiers from different species sat together and shared stories. Now he was here to bring the humans home. The Marathi commander of the station, a soft-spoken officer with pale blue skin, met him at the airlock. "Captain Bei," she said, "I want you to know that many of us did not support this vote." Juan nodded. "I know." "Will you come back?" Juan looked at her for a long moment. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to say that this was temporary, that the Senate would change its mind, that things would go back to normal. But Admiral Dohan's orders had been very clear. Say nothing about the future. Be polite, be professional, and leave nothing behind. "Take care of this station," Juan said. He shook her hand, turned, and walked to his ship. Behind him, the Marathi commander stood alone in the corridor and felt, for the first time, the weight of what the galaxy had done. While the public withdrawal played out across the stars, a quieter operation was happening in the shadows. Shin Unji's intelligence teams moved through shared systems like ghosts, pulling out equipment that no one had ever known was there. Listening posts hidden inside asteroid fields. Surveillance satellites disguised as space junk. Communication relays buried in the dead zones between stars. For decades, humanity had been quietly mapping the galaxy's secrets, and now they were packing it all up. Unji sat in her command center on Earth, watching green dots disappear from her screen one by one as each asset was recovered. Kang Taeho stood beside her, monitoring a different set of data, the activation of Project Horizon. Project Horizon was the reason Dohun had not panicked when the vote was announced. It was a network of hidden infrastructure that Earth had been building in secret for over 20 years. Shipyards carved into dead moons, in systems that no one had bothered to explore. Fuel depots hidden in gas giants. Manufacturing stations powered by the cores of dying stars. Communication relays so deeply buried that even Yunji's best equipment could barely detect them. It was a second civilization, built in the dark, waiting to be turned on. Taeho had designed most of it. He was an engineer, not a soldier, and he had always preferred building things to destroying them. But he understood the logic. Humanity had always been good at preparing for the worst. It was written into their history. Every war, every disaster, every collapse had taught them the same lesson. Hope for the best, build for the worst. Shipyard 6 is online, Taeho reported. 7 and 8 will be operational within the week. We can start production by day 40. Yunji nodded without looking up. What about the resource depots? All intact. Enough raw material to sustain full production for 5 years without any outside trade. They really thought we needed them more than they needed us. By day 30, Earth had withdrawn from 70% of shared space. The Senate celebrated. Vorin gave a speech about a new era of galactic stability. Gessen, the Dracovian warlord, held a military parade. But the cracks were already showing. Shipping lanes that had depended on human logistics companies were slowing down. Cargo that once moved in days now took weeks. Medical supplies that human biotech firms had produced were running out. Hospitals on a dozen worlds sent urgent requests to the Senate for alternatives. There were no alternatives. Human biotech was decades ahead of everyone else, and no one had bothered to develop backup sources because no one had imagined that human supply would ever stop. Border patrols that had relied on human soldiers were suddenly short-staffed. The Broken Rim, a lawless stretch of space that humanity had spent years cleaning up, began to stir again. Pirate ships that had been hiding in deep space for years started moving. Raiders tested the weakened borders. 3 small colonies sent distress signals in the same week. Taylor watched all of this from her office with a growing sense of dread. She requested another meeting with Vorin. This time, he agreed to see her. "We made a mistake," she told him directly. "The humans were not a threat. They were the foundation. We have removed a load-bearing wall, and the ceiling is starting to crack." Vorin looked at her with his forearms folded across his chest. "The galaxy survived for thousands of years before humans arrived," he said. "We will survive without them." Taylor left his office, knowing that he was wrong, but unable to prove it. The collapse was still slow, still quiet, still easy to ignore. But on Earth, in a room deep underground, Admiral Park Dohan was watching the same data with the patience of a man who knew exactly how the next 60 days would unfold. "Right on schedule," he said. On day 60, Earth went dark. It did not happen slowly. It happened all at once, like someone blowing out a candle. Every human communication relay in the galaxy shut down at the same moment. Every embassy channel, every trade frequency, every diplomatic line, all of them went silent. The border systems that had once welcomed galactic travelers now broadcast a single message on repeat in 4,000 languages. "Human space is closed. Unauthorized entry will be treated as invasion. There will be no second warning." That was all. No explanation, no timeline, no offer to talk. For the first few days, the galaxy treated it as a political gesture. Vorin called it a childish display of wounded pride. The Dracovian media mocked it openly. A few species even celebrated, saying that the humans had finally accepted their place. But the silence continued, and as it continued, things began to break. The first crisis hit the outer trade lanes. 47 star systems had depended on human logistics networks to move goods between them. Without those networks, cargo ships had to find new routes, new fuel stops, new communication relays. Journeys that had taken 3 days now took 12. Perishable goods rotted in transit. Prices doubled, then tripled. On the mining worlds of the Pelori Federation, workers went unpaid because the companies that employed them could not sell their ore. Protests broke out on 6 different planets in the same week. The second crisis hit the medical systems. Human biotech companies had produced 60% of the galaxy's advanced pharmaceuticals. Not the simple drugs, those could be made anywhere, but the complex treatments, gene therapies, synthetic organ compounds, neural repair solutions. These required technology and expertise that only human labs possessed. And now those labs were behind a wall of silence. On the Marathi homeworld, a plague variant began to spread through the population. It was not a new disease, but a mutation of an old one. And the only effective treatment was a human-developed gene therapy called Compound Sera 9. The Marathi had stockpiled some, but not enough. Their scientists tried to reverse engineer it, but the molecular structure was too complex. They needed human help. Ambassador Taylor went to the Senate floor and demanded action. "We need to contact Earth," she said. "People are dying." Vorin sat in his high chair and looked down at her with his usual calm expression. "The humans chose to close their borders. That is their right under galactic law." "Galactic law that we forced on them," Taylor shot back. "We banished them. We broke every agreement. And now, when we face the consequences, you sit there and talk about rights?" The chamber murmured. Vorin said nothing. Taylor left the Senate that day and made a decision. If the Senate would not act, she would act alone. She took a small diplomatic ship and flew to the edge of human space. It took her 4 days. When she arrived, she found exactly what she expected, a wall of automated defense platforms stretching across the border like a chain of iron. Each platform was dark and silent, showing no signs of life, but her ship's sensors told her that every one of them was armed and active. She opened a wideband communication channel and spoke. "This is Ambassador Taylor of the Marathi Collective. I am here on behalf of my people. We are facing a medical emergency. We need your help. Please respond." She waited. 1 hour, 2 hours, 5. Only the cold hum of empty space. She tried again, adjusting her frequency, using old diplomatic codes, even broadcasting in English. "Please," she said, "people are dying. Whatever anger you feel, whatever justice you believe you are serving, I am asking you, not as a government, but as a living being. Please respond." Silence. Taylor sat in her ship for a long time, staring at the dark border. Then she turned around and flew home. She did not know that her message had been heard. Deep inside human space, in the command center of the Pacific facility, Shin Unji played the recording for Admiral Dohun and Ambassador Nari. The three of them sat in the dim room and listened to Taylor's voice, small and tired, asking for help that would not come. Nari's jaw tightened. She had spent her entire career building bridges between species. She had believed in the Galactic Compact. She had believed that cooperation was possible. Hearing Taylor's plea made something ache inside her chest. "She voted for us," Nari said quietly. "The Marathi voted against the expulsion." "I know," Dohun said. "People are dying, Dohun. I know that too." The room was silent for a long moment. Inji watched the two of them, saying nothing. "Not yet," Dohun said. His voice was soft, but firm. "They voted. All of them sat in that chamber and let it happen. The ones who voted for us did not fight hard enough. The ones who voted against us thought there would be no cost. They all need to understand what they did. Every single one of them." Nari closed her eyes. She did not agree, but she understood. Outside Earth's borders, the galaxy continued to fall apart. Warlord Gessen of the Dracovian Empire had been waiting for this moment his entire life. With humanity gone and the Senate weakened, he moved his fleets into the disputed border regions between Dracovian space and the Marathi Collective. Within 2 weeks, he had seized 2 Marathi colony worlds. The populations were not harmed, but the message was clear. The Dracovians were expanding, and no one could stop them. The Senate passed a resolution condemning the annexation. Gessen did not even bother to respond. The fleet that used to enforce Senate resolutions in that sector had been human. Without it, the Senate's words were just noise. Pirate attacks across the outer systems reached levels not seen in decades. 3 colony worlds went dark, not because they were destroyed, but because they simply ran out of supplies, and their populations scattered to find safety elsewhere. The Broken Rim, which humanity had spent years pacifying, became a lawless zone again, almost overnight. On the Senate floor, the species that had voted for banishment began to argue among themselves. Blame shifted like water. Vorin had led the coalition, but now its members were turning on each other. "We were told there would be a transition plan," one delegate said. "We were told other species would fill the gaps." There was no transition plan. There were no species to fill the gaps. Humanity had been doing more than anyone realized, and now that they were gone, the truth was impossible to ignore. By day 85, the situation was critical. Taylor stood before the Senate one last time and spoke clearly. "We are out of time," she said. "Our medical supplies are running out. Our borders are collapsing. Our economy is failing. We banished the one species that was holding this galaxy together, and now we are paying the price. If we do not act now, there will not be a galaxy left to save." Vorin stared at her from his seat. For the first time, there was something in his eyes that looked like doubt. 12,000 light-years away, Kang Taeho walked into Dohun's office with a datapad in his hand and a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. "The fleet is ready," he said. 612 ships, Fully armed, fully supplied. Crew complements are at 100%. Do-hoon took the datapad and looked at the numbers. 612 warships, built in secret over 90 days in hidden shipyards that the galaxy did not know existed. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, and it had been built from nothing while the galaxy thought they were licking their wounds. And the Baekdu? Do-hoon asked. Taeho allowed himself a small smile. She is beautiful. Do-hoon set the datapad down and looked out the window at the stars. Tell Nari to prepare the terms, he said. It is time to go back. Day 91. One day after the withdrawal deadline had passed. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Senate was full again, but the mood was nothing like it had been 90 days ago. There were no celebrations, no confident speeches. The seats that had once been filled with pride were now filled with fear. Delegates whispered to each other, some looked exhausted, some looked angry, many looked lost. Vorin stood at his podium and called the emergency session to order. His voice, which had once filled the chamber with authority, now sounded thinner, older. He cleared his throat and spoke. The Senate has called this emergency session to discuss the current state of galactic affairs, and to propose a motion to invite the Earth delegation to renegotiate terms of engagement. It was a careful sentence. Every word had been chosen to avoid admitting fault. Invite instead of beg. Renegotiate instead of reverse. Terms of engagement instead of the mistake we made. Everyone in the chamber understood what the words really meant. They needed humanity back, and they needed them now. Ambassador Taylor sat in her seat and watched Vorin with tired eyes. She had spent the last month watching her people die from a disease that humans could have cured in a week. She had no patience left for careful words. Before Vorin could call for a vote on his proposal, every screen in the Grand Chamber flickered. The lights dimmed for half a second. Then the main display, the massive curved screen that hung above the center of the chamber, went white. A face appeared on it. Calm, still, human. Admiral Park Do-hoon stood on the bridge of a warship, his hands behind his back. He wore a simple dark uniform with no medals and no decorations. Behind him, through the wide viewport of the bridge, the stars were visible, and among them, shapes, ships, hundreds of them, stretching out in formation like a steel forest. The chamber went completely silent. Do-hoon did not smile. He did not raise his voice. He spoke the way he always spoke, low and clear and steady. Members of the Galactic Senate, 91 days ago, you voted to banish humanity from the Galactic Compact. We respected your decision. We withdrew from every shared system, every joint station, every trade route, and every defense pact. We did exactly what you asked, within the time you gave us. He paused and let those words settle. Now it appears you would like us to return. We are willing to discuss that, but we will not be returning to the old arrangement. A murmur spread through the chamber. Vorin gripped the edge of his podium. The camera shifted slightly, and Nari stepped into frame beside Do-hoon. She looked different from the woman who had stood at the lowest podium 90 days ago. She still wore her dark blue uniform, but there was something harder in her eyes now. Something that had been forged in 90 days of silence and patience, and watching the galaxy burn from behind a closed door. What you are looking at behind us, Nari said, is the ESS Baekdu, the flagship of Earth's new sovereign fleet. It was built in the last 90 days, along with 611 other warships, in facilities that you did not know existed. We are not showing you this to threaten you. We are showing you this so that you understand the situation clearly. She held up a datapad. This is the doctrine of sovereign reentry. These are humanity's terms for returning to galactic affairs. They are not suggestions. They are not starting points for negotiation. They are final. She read them out, one by one, and with each one, the chamber grew quieter. First, Earth would receive a permanent seat on the Senate Security Council with full veto authority. No galactic body would ever again be able to vote on humanity's membership or status without human consent. Second, humanity would receive unrestricted expansion rights in all designated frontier zones. No species could contest human colonization of unclaimed systems, now or in the future. Third, full intellectual property sovereignty. Human technology, medicine, and biotech would be traded on human terms, at human prices, under human law. The days of sharing everything through the galactic commons were over. Fourth, military non-interference. No galactic body could regulate the size, composition, or deployment of Earth's fleet, under any circumstances. Fifth, and Nari paused before reading this one, the Dracovian annexations of Marathi territory were to be reversed within 30 standard days. If they were not, Earth would reverse them by force. The chamber erupted. Voices rose from every section. Some shouted in anger, some shouted in disbelief. Gessen, the Dracovian warlord, rose from his seat with his fists clenched, his face twisted in fury. "This is blackmail," he roared. "You would threaten the Senate? You would hold the galaxy hostage?" Nari looked directly at him. Her expression did not change. "We held the galaxy together for 80 years, she said. "You did not notice until we stopped. This is not blackmail, warlord. This is the price of our return. You are free to refuse. We will simply close the door again, and you can continue managing things on your own." Gessen opened his mouth, and then closed it. He looked around the chamber for support. He found very little. Vorin spoke next, his voice strained. "These terms are extreme. You are asking for more power than any species has ever held in the history of the Compact." Dohun stepped forward. "No. We are asking for enough power to make sure this never happens again. You voted to banish us because you were afraid of how fast we were growing. You were afraid of what we might become, and instead of talking to us, instead of working with us, you cast us out like a disease. You do not get to do that twice." The chamber was silent. "You have 48 hours to accept or reject the doctrine," Nari said. "If you accept, we will begin re-engagement immediately. Our medical teams will arrive at the Marathi homeworld within 72 hours with enough compound Sera-9 to stop the plague. Our trade ships will re-enter the shipping lanes within a week. Our defense fleet will move to the Broken Rim and restore order within a month." She paused. "If you reject, we wish you well. Human space will remain closed, permanently." She reached for the control panel on the bridge and looked up at the chamber one last time. "You had a galaxy with us as partners," she said. "You chose to make us strangers. Now we return as something else. Accept the terms or enjoy the silence again." The feed cut to black. The Grand Chamber sat in stunned quiet. 4,000 representatives from 312 species stared at the dark screen. Some had their mouths open. Some had their eyes closed. Some were already doing the math in their heads, counting the cost of saying no. Taylor was the first to move. She stood from her seat, straightened her robes, and walked to the speaking podium. She looked up at Vorin. "I move to accept the doctrine of sovereign re-entry in full," she said. "Without amendment, without delay." Vorin stared down at her. His 4 hands gripped the podium so tightly that the wood cracked. "The motion is noted," he said quietly. "The Senate will reconvene in 48 hours for a vote." The delegates filed out in near silence. In the hallways, conversations broke out like small fires, heated, fearful, and desperate. Everyone knew the vote was coming. Everyone knew how it would end. 12,000 light-years away, Dohun turned off the broadcast and looked at Nari. She was breathing slowly, her hands clasped in front of her. "Do you think they will accept?" she asked. Dohun looked out at the fleet through the viewport of the Baekdu. 600 ships, gleaming in the starlight, each one built by human hands in hidden places, while the galaxy thought they were defeated. "They do not have a choice," he said. The vote came 31 hours early. The Senate did not even wait for the full 48. The coalition that Vorin had spent months building fell apart in a single night. The Pelori Federation was the first to break, issuing a public statement that they would accept humanity's terms without reservation. The smaller species followed within hours, one after another, like dominoes falling in a line. By morning, 60% of the Senate had already declared their position. The remaining 40% read the numbers and understood that the debate was over before it began. When the final vote was called, the result was 301 to 11. The doctrine of sovereign reentry was accepted. Humanity would return on its own terms, and the galaxy would live with that decision. Vorin did not speak during the vote. He sat in his high chair with his forearms folded and his face empty of expression. When the numbers appeared on the screen, he stared at them for a long moment, then stood and walked out of the chamber without a word. His resignation was submitted the following day. No speech, no farewell. He simply vanished from public life, and within weeks, most of the galaxy had already begun to forget his name. But one problem remained: the Dracovians. Warlord Gessen had voted against the doctrine. He had not expected to win, but he had no intention of obeying the fifth term, the demand to withdraw from the 2 Marathi colony worlds he had seized. In his mind, those worlds were his now. He had taken them when the galaxy was weak, and he would not give them back because some human admiral told him to. He sent a broadcast across his empire. "The Dracovian people do not kneel," he said. "Not to the Senate, not to Earth, not to anyone. If the humans want these worlds, let them come and take them." The galaxy held its breath. On Earth, Captain Beijuan sat in the command chair of the Namhe and read Gessen's broadcast on his personal screen. He had been waiting for this. Everyone had been waiting for this. The Dracovians were proud, and proud nations do not change course easily. Admiral Dohan's orders came through within the hour. They were simple. Take a battle group of 40 ships to the occupied Marathi system. Give Gessen 6 hours to withdraw. If he did not, resolve the situation. Juwan gathered his captains in the briefing room of the Namhe. They were young, most of them, but they had trained for years in the hidden facilities of Project Horizon. They were sharp and calm and ready. "We are not going there to start a war," Juwan told them. "We are going there to end one before it begins. The Dracovian garrison has 120 ships. We have 40. That means we need to be smart." He turned to the tactical display and brought up a map. It was covered in red markers. Every Dracovian communication relay, logistics node, fuel depot, and command frequency in the system. All of them mapped in perfect detail. "Director Shin's teams have been watching the Dracovians since the day we withdrew," Juwan said. "We know how they talk to each other. We know how they move supplies. We know how their command structure works. We are going to take all of that apart in the first 10 minutes. After that, there will be 120 ships with no way to talk to each other, no way to coordinate, and no orders to follow. At that point, we will not need to fight them. They will figure out the rest on their own." The battle group launched that evening. The journey took 2 days. When Juwan's fleet arrived at the edge of the Marathi system, the Dracovian garrison was already in formation. 120 warships, arranged in a tight defensive wall around the 2 occupied planets. Their weapons were hot, their shields were up. Gessen himself was there, commanding from his flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Iron Fang. Juwan opened a single communication channel. His voice was steady and unhurried. "Warlord Gessen, this is Captain Beijuan of the Earth's Sovereign Fleet. You have 6 hours to withdraw your forces from Marathi space. After that, we stop asking." Gessen's face appeared on the screen. He was grinning. 40 ships, he said, counting Juwan's fleet on his own sensors. You bring 40 ships against my 120? Are all humans this stupid, or just you? Juon did not respond. He closed the channel and waited. The 6 hours passed slowly. Juon spent them sitting calmly in his chair, reading a book on his datapad. His crew watched the clock and tried not to think about the numbers. 40 against 120. Every logical calculation said they should lose. But logic depends on what you know. And the Dracovians did not know what was coming. At 5 hours and 59 minutes, Juon set his book down and gave a single command. Begin. The Namhe did not fire at the Dracovian ships. It fired at something much more important, their communication network. Shin Unji's intelligence teams had spent 90 days mapping every signal relay and command node in Dracovian space. They knew exactly which frequencies carried orders, which satellites connected the ships to each other, and which encryption codes held the whole system together. In 11 minutes, every relay in the system was destroyed. Every command frequency was jammed. Every encrypted channel was flooded with noise. The Dracovian fleet, 120 strong, went blind and deaf all at once. The result was immediate. Ships that had been holding perfect formation began to drift. Captains who had been waiting for orders from Gessen heard nothing but static. Weapon systems that required coordination locked shut down automatically. The great iron wall of the Dracovian garrison broke apart like a sandcastle hit by a wave. Juon moved his fleet through the gaps without firing another shot. His ships slid between the confused Dracovian vessels like water flowing through cracks in a dam. One by one, the Dracovian captains, unable to reach Gessen, unable to reach each other, and watching 40 human ships pass through their lines untouched, made the only rational decision left. They lowered their weapons and broadcast surrender signals on open frequencies. The entire operation, from the first shot to the last surrender, took less than 4 hours. Gessen's flagship, the Iron Fang, was the last to yield. The great warlord stood on his bridge and watched his fleet dissolve around him. He could not give orders. He could not call for reinforcements. He could not even call for retreat. He was the commander of the most powerful garrison in Dracovian space, and he was standing in complete silence. When Juon opened a channel to him, Gessen did not speak. He stared at the screen for a long time, his jaw tight, his eyes burning. Then he turned and walked off his own bridge. The Iron Fang's second officer broadcast the surrender. The Marathi colony worlds were free. The occupation was over. Not a single life was lost on either side. When the news reached the Senate, the chamber erupted. Not in anger this time, but in something closer to awe. The Dracovian garrison, one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy, had been dismantled in under 4 hours by a fleet 1/3 its size, and the humans had done it without killing a single soul. That was the part that frightened people most. Not the strength, not the technology, the precision. The fact that humanity could have turned those 40 ships into weapons of destruction and chose not to. They had taken apart an army the way a surgeon takes apart a knot, carefully, cleanly, and with no wasted motion. Ambassador Taylor was waiting when Nari arrived at the Senate to take her new seat on the Security Council. The two women stood in the hallway outside the chamber, alone for a moment. "Was this always the plan?" Taylor asked. Nari looked at her. There was no triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction, just the quiet look of someone who had done something necessary and wished it had not been. "We hoped it would not be," Nari said, "but we built for the possibility that it would." Taylor nodded slowly. "And if the Senate had not voted to banish you, if none of this had happened?" Nari thought about that for a moment. Then the ships would have stayed hidden. The fleet would never have been built. Project Horizon would have remained a set of emergency blueprints in a locked file. We did not want this, Taylor. We wanted to be partners. But we learned a long time ago that wanting something is not enough. You have to be ready for the moment when the world decides you do not belong. She turned and walked into the chamber. The doors opened, and 4,000 faces looked at her. She climbed the steps to the upper tier, to the seat that had been empty since the Security Council was founded, the seat that no species had ever been powerful enough or trusted enough to claim. She sat down, she folded her hands on the desk, and she looked out at the galaxy that had once thrown her people away. On the bridge of the Baekdu, Admiral Park Do-hun stood at the viewport and watched the stars. Kang Tae-ho stood beside him, his hands in his pockets, his face relaxed for the first time in months. "Do you think they will try it again?" Tae-ho asked. Do-hun was quiet for a while. He thought about the vote. He thought about the silence. He thought about Taylor's voice, small and tired, broadcasting into the dark. He thought about Nari, sitting in a chair that no one had ever sat in before. "No," he said finally. "They have learned the lesson." "What lesson is that?" Do-hun looked at him. There was no pride in his face, no anger, just the calm certainty of a man who had seen the worst and built something strong enough to survive it. "You do not banish the ones who are holding everything together," he said. "And if you do, you had better be ready for the world they build without you." Tae-ho nodded. He looked out at the fleet, 600 ships shining in the starlight, built in darkness, revealed in silence, and used not to destroy, but to prove a point that the galaxy would never forget. Humanity was done asking for a seat at the table. They had built their own.